The night Clara Bennett lost her job, the Whitmore Grand Hotel was glowing like a palace built for people who never had to worry about rent. Crystal chandeliers poured gold light over marble floors, champagne glasses chimed softly in the ballroom, and women in silk gowns laughed as if the world had been designed only for their comfort. Clara moved quietly through the service corridor in a gray housekeeping uniform, carrying fresh towels against her chest and trying not to look as tired as she felt. Her mother's hospital bill was folded inside her locker downstairs. Her final tuition notice sat unopened in her bag, and every hour she worked inside that hotel was another hour she told herself she could survive one more month. Clara was not invisible because she lacked beauty. She was invisible because the people around her had been taught not to see anyone who served them. She had learned to step aside before wealthy guests reached the hallway, to lower her eyes when executives passed, to smile even when someone handed her trash without looking at her face. But she noticed everything. She noticed the way rooms changed when Ethan Whitmore entered them. The heir to the hotel empire was young, handsome, and colder than the marble beneath his polished shoes. People did not greet Ethan. They adjusted themselves around him. That evening, the hotel was hosting an engagement gala in his honor. Ethan Whitmore and Vivian Cross were supposed to be the perfect couple. Wealth beside beauty, power beside elegance, a union polished enough for magazines. Vivian wore diamonds at her throat and cruelty behind her smile. She spoke softly to donors, kissed cheeks she did not respect, and treated staff as if they were furniture that occasionally moved too slowly. Clara had already heard Vivian snap at two servers and reduce a young receptionist to tears. Still, Clara kept working. A woman with bills could not afford pride in the wrong room. Near midnight, Clara entered the private corridor outside the presidential suite with clean linens folded over her arm. She stopped when she heard Vivian's voice, sharp and low, coming from behind a half-open door. "You said no one would find out," Vivian hissed. A man Clara did not recognize answered in a tense whisper, but his words were swallowed by music from the ballroom. Clara froze, knowing she had heard something she was never meant to hear. Before she could step back, Vivian opened the door. Their eyes met, and Clara saw in one cold second that Vivian Cross had decided she was a problem. 10 minutes later, a diamond bracelet disappeared from the presidential suite. 5 minutes after that, Vivian screamed. Security rushed in, guests turned, staff stopped breathing, and Clara, still holding a stack of towels outside the service elevator, found herself surrounded before she understood what was happening. Vivian pointed at her with trembling fingers and perfect tears. "She was near my room," she said. "I saw her. Check her pockets." Clara's face went cold. "I didn't take anything." But innocence sounded small in a hallway filled with wealth. A security guard searched her apron while guests whispered behind champagne glasses. Someone said, "How embarrassing." Someone else murmured, "You never really know who these people are?" Then the bracelet appeared inside the pocket of Clara's housekeeping cart, placed beneath folded washcloths where she had never put it. The hallway fell silent, and Clara understood that truth did not always arrive before judgment. Ethan Whitmore appeared at the end of the corridor like a verdict in a black tuxedo. He did not ask Clara what happened. He did not look at the terror in her face long enough to recognize it as human. Vivian stepped toward him, crying beautifully, and he placed a protective hand at her back. Clara tried to speak, but the words broke against the wall of his expression. Ethan looked at her uniform, her trembling hands, the bracelet in the guard's palm. Then he said the sentence that would live inside her for years. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The words were not shouted. That made them worse. They were calm, polished, and public, spoken by a man who had never wondered whether a single sentence could destroy someone's life. Clara felt every eye in the hallway turn her into something smaller than a person, a thief, a mistake, a warning to the rest of the staff. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Ethan had already turned away, as if dismissing her required less effort than noticing her pain. That night, Clara was escorted through the service exit while rain hammered the alley behind the hotel. Her employee badge was taken from her. Her final paycheck was withheld pending investigation. Her name was whispered through staff rooms before morning. She stood beneath the loading dock light, soaked to the bone, holding the cardboard box that contained her cheap shoes, her locker key, and the notebook where she had written dreams of studying hotel management. For a moment, she wanted to collapse. Instead, she looked back at the glowing hotel and made herself a promise. One day, she would walk through the front entrance, not as a maid, not as a beggar asking to be believed, not as a woman waiting for powerful people to decide whether she had value. Years would pass before the Whitmore Grand saw Clara Bennett again. By then, Ethan Whitmore would no longer be the untouchable heir everyone feared. Vivian's perfect lies would begin to rot beneath their diamonds, and Clara would return to the hotel that humiliated her with her head high, her name on the ownership papers, and the kind of dignity no billionaire could ever buy. Clara Bennett had started that evening with a safety pin holding the hem of her uniform together and a prayer folded silently behind her teeth. The Whitmore Grand Hotel did not care about prayers. It cared about polished marble, spotless mirrors, crystal glasses, and guests who never had to ask the price of anything. But Clara cared because she had a mother in a hospital bed, a tuition payment she could not make, and a dream she refused to surrender even when exhaustion pressed against her bones. She had arrived before sunset, tied her hair back neatly, checked her housekeeping cart twice, and told herself the same thing she told herself every shift. Just do the work, keep your head down, survive the night. The engagement gala had turned the entire hotel into a stage. Florists carried white roses through the lobby. Servers balanced silver trays of champagne. Musicians tuned their instruments beneath chandeliers that scattered gold across the ballroom ceiling. Everywhere Clara looked, there was beauty arranged for people who would never clean up after it. She moved quietly along the service corridors, replacing towels, checking guest suites, and making sure no one important had a reason to complain. In a place like the Whitmore Grand, one complaint could cost a worker more than pride. Clara knew Ethan Whitmore only from a distance. Everyone on staff knew him that way. He was the heir, the future owner, the man whose family name was stitched into the towels, carved into the front doors, and whispered by managers when they wanted staff to stand straighter. He was handsome in a severe way, with dark blonde hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that made apology seem beneath him. When Ethan crossed the lobby, conversations adjusted. Managers smiled too quickly. Guests leaned closer. Staff disappeared into walls. That night, he stood beside Vivian Cross near the ballroom entrance, accepting congratulations with a smile that never fully reached his eyes. Vivian was radiant in a silver gown, diamonds at her throat, her red lips curved in perfect softness whenever cameras appeared, but Clara had already seen what happened when cameras turned away. Vivian had snapped at a server for touching the edge of her glass. She had called a receptionist hopeless for mispronouncing a guest's name, and when a young housekeeper accidentally stepped into her path, Vivian had looked at the girl as if she had found dirt on her shoe. Clara had learned long ago that elegance did not always mean grace. Near 11, Clara was sent to the presidential suite with fresh towels and a replacement set of crystal water glasses. The hallway outside the suite was quieter than the ballroom, insulated by thick carpets and expensive silence. She pushed her cart carefully, grateful for a few minutes away from the noise. Then she heard Vivian's voice through a half-open door. It was not the sweet gala voice Vivian used in public. It was low, sharp, and frightened. "You promised me this would never come back to Ethan," Vivian said. Clara stopped before she could stop herself. A man answered from inside the room, his voice tense and unfamiliar. "I kept my part quiet. You were the one who got careless." Clara's hands tightened around the folded towels. She knew she should move away. Service staff survived by not hearing things powerful people wanted hidden, but the cartwheel caught softly against the carpet seam, making the smallest sound. Inside the room, silence fell. The door opened. Vivian stood there, flawless and furious, the diamonds at her throat flashing beneath the hallway light. For 1 second, neither woman spoke. Clara lowered her eyes immediately. "I'm sorry, Miss Cross. I was bringing towels." Vivian looked at the cart, then at Clara's face. Her expression changed so quickly that Clara felt the danger before she understood it. The anger disappeared. A smile appeared, and somehow the smile was worse. "Leave them inside," Vivian said. Clara obeyed, stepping into the suite just far enough to place the towels on a side table. The room smelled of perfume, champagne, and expensive flowers. The unfamiliar man was gone, or hidden somewhere Clara could not see. On the vanity lay Vivian's jewelry case, open, diamonds arranged under soft light like captured stars. Clara kept her hands close to herself, careful not to touch anything beyond the towels. When she turned to leave, Vivian was watching her with a stillness that made her stomach tighten. "You saw nothing," Vivian said quietly. Clara froze. "I didn't mean to hear anything. That is not what I said." The softness vanished from Vivian's voice. Clara lifted her chin just enough to keep from sounding afraid. "I'm only here to do my job." Vivian stepped closer and the diamonds at her throat glittered like small cold warnings. "Then do it wisely." Clara left the suite with her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She pushed the cart toward the service elevator, telling herself not to think about the man's voice, the open jewelry case, or Vivian's sudden smile. She had almost reached the elevator when Vivian screamed. The sound tore through the quiet corridor, sharp enough to bring security running. Doors opened. Guests leaned out. A manager appeared, pale and breathless. Clara turned around slowly, already knowing somehow that the scream had been meant for her. "My bracelet!" Vivian cried, standing in the suite doorway with one hand pressed dramatically to her throat. "My diamond bracelet is gone!" The manager looked at the staff first. Not the guests, not Vivian, the staff. Clara felt that look land on her uniform before it reached her face. Vivian's eyes found hers with perfect precision. "She was in my room," she said. "She was alone near my jewelry." "Yeah," Clara's mouth went dry. "That is not true. I brought towels. I touched nothing else." Vivian's eyes filled with tears so polished they looked rehearsed. "Please check her cart." A few guests had gathered now, whispering in silk and tuxedos. Clara saw one woman clutch her purse closer. The gesture struck harder than an accusation. A security guard stepped toward the cart. Clara wanted to object, but fear held her still, because innocent people often sounded guilty when forced to defend themselves too quickly. The guard lifted towels, opened drawers, checked beneath folded washcloths. For one unbearable second, Clara believed truth would save her. Then he pulled out a diamond bracelet wrapped in a small white hand towel. The hallway went silent. Clara stared at it, unable to breathe. She had never seen that bracelet before except for the glitter of it on Vivian's wrist earlier that evening. But there it was, shining in the guard's hand like proof. Not truth, proof. "I didn't put that there," Clara whispered. No one seemed to hear her. Or worse, they heard and chose not to believe. The manager's face hardened with fear for his own position. Vivian stepped back as if Clara had personally wounded her. Then Ethan Whitmore arrived. The crowd shifted before him, making space the way people always did for his name. He took in the scene, Vivian crying, the bracelet in the guard's hand, Clara in her gray uniform beside the cart. And Clara watched him decide who mattered before he asked a single question. "Mr. Whitmore," Clara said, forcing her voice to rise, "I did not steal anything. Please check the cameras. Ask who else was in the room. I heard—" Vivian interrupted with a sob. "She's trying to make this uglier?" Ethan's gaze cut back to Clara. It was not rage she saw in him. Rage might have meant he felt something. What she saw was colder, annoyance, as if her innocence was an inconvenience to the elegance of his evening. "You were found with the bracelet," Ethan said. "It was planted. Enough." The word was quiet, but it closed around the hallway like a door locking. Clara felt heat rise to her face, not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being dismissed before she had been heard. She looked past him at Vivian, and for one instant Vivian's tears disappeared. Only satisfaction remained. Then Ethan spoke again, each word smooth enough for the guests and sharp enough to cut Clara open. "People like you don't belong in places like this." The sentence emptied the hallway of air. Clara stood completely still. She wanted to say that people like her changed the sheets in places like this, scrubbed the bathrooms, polished the mirrors, carried the trays, calmed the angry guests, and kept the palace shining, while people like him congratulated themselves for owning it. But the words stayed trapped behind the ache in her throat. The manager took her badge, security took her cart, and Ethan turned away as if he had already forgotten her. They escorted Clara through the service corridors, past the laundry room, past the staff lockers, past the time clock where her final shift remained unfinished. Outside, rain fell hard in the alley behind the hotel. Someone handed her a cardboard box with her shoes, her locker key, and the small notebook where she had written class schedules for hotel management courses she could no longer afford. The service door closed behind her with a dull metal sound. For a moment, Clara stood beneath the loading dock light and let the rain hide the tears she refused to give them. Then she looked toward the glowing front entrance of the Whitmore Grand and made a promise so quiet no one heard it but God. One day she would come back through those doors, and no one would ever again decide where she belonged. The morning after Clara Bennett was thrown out of the Whitmore Grand, the world did not pause to ask whether she was innocent. Rent was still due, her mother still needed medication, the hospital still called about balances no one had the mercy to whisper, and the city outside her apartment window kept moving as if one young woman's name had not been quietly ruined overnight. Clara woke with swollen eyes, a sore throat, and the strange heaviness that comes when pain remembers before the body fully wakes. For one brief second, she forgot. Then everything returned. Her uniform was still damp in the corner of the room. Her employee badge was gone. Her final paycheck was being held pending review, which meant she had worked hours she might never be paid for. Her notebook lay open on the kitchen table, the pages curled from rain, the ink blurred in places where water had fallen, class schedules, tuition numbers, hotel management programs, dreams written carefully by a woman who had believed hard work could build a bridge over almost anything. Clara stared at the pages until the letters became impossible to read. Her mother, Elena Bennett, called just before 8. Clara almost did not answer. She could lie to landlords, smile at strangers, and tell co-workers she was fine while her life cracked open quietly behind her ribs, but her mother heard truth inside silence. "Clara," Elena said, her voice weak but warm. "What happened?" Clara pressed the phone to her ear and closed her eyes. For a moment she wanted to be a child again, small enough for someone else to fight the world for her. Instead, she whispered, "I lost the job." Elena did not ask if Clara had done what they accused her of. That was one mercy Clara would never forget. Her mother simply breathed in slowly, then said, "Then we will survive without it." The words were gentle, but they carried the old steel Clara had inherited from her. "We?" Clara asked, trying not to cry. "Yes," Elena said. "Do not let cruel people make you feel alone. That is how they win twice." Clara sat very still, holding the phone with both hands. The hotel had taken her job, her reputation, and her paycheck, but it had not taken that. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. No miracle arrived at her door. No powerful stranger cleared her name. No hidden camera footage appeared to rescue her from shame. The Whitmore Grand moved on before the rain had even dried from the loading dock. Vivian Cross remained beautiful in society photographs. Ethan Whitmore remained admired, invited, obeyed. Clara's name, meanwhile, became a quiet stain in places where hotel managers spoke to one another. Applications disappeared into silence. Interviews ended when employers heard where she had worked last. So Clara took whatever work, did not ask too many questions. She cleaned offices at night. She folded linens at a small laundry service where steam burned her wrists. She served breakfast at a roadside cafe that smelled of frying oil and old coffee. Some days she left one job at dawn and arrived at another before her feet had stopped hurting from the first. At night, she studied from used textbooks bought with coins she should have saved for groceries. If the Whitmore Grand had wanted her to disappear, then Clara decided she would become visible in a way no accusation could erase. She learned hotel management from the bottom up, not because a professor made it romantic, but because survival made it practical. She learned how many minutes it took to turn a room properly without breaking the back of the person doing it. She learned how front desk staff carried the anger of guests who confused service with servitude. She learned that a broken elevator could destroy a weekend's reputation faster than a bad review. She learned that luxury was often built on invisible labor. And she learned with growing certainty that if she ever led a hotel, no employee under her would have to shrink to keep a job. Once a month, Clara visited her mother with flowers from the discount bin at a market near the bus station. Elena always acted as if they were imported roses. She would touch the petals, smile, and ask Clara what she had learned that week. Not what had hurt, not what had gone wrong, what she had learned. At first, Clara hated the question because learning felt too small compared to losing. But slowly, painfully, the question became a ladder. One step, then another, then another. 3 months after the accusation, Clara received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short letter written in careful handwriting. "I know you did not steal the bracelet. I could not prove it then, and I'm ashamed I did not do more. If you ever need someone to speak for your work, I will. Margaret Hayes." Clara read the letter twice, then a third time, sitting on the edge of her bed. Margaret had been the housekeeping supervisor at the Whitmore Grand, a woman who rarely smiled but always noticed when a room was cleaned well. The letter did not repair what had happened, but it told Clara one thing she desperately needed to know. Someone had seen her. That letter became her first bridge back into hospitality. Margaret could not erase the rumors, but she could speak with the kind of steady authority that made one small hotel owner listen. That was how Clara got a position at the Rosebridge Inn, a failing roadside hotel with peeling wallpaper, tired staff, and a sign that flickered whenever it rained. It was not glamorous. It was not the Whitmore Grand. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet, but when the owner handed Clara a name tag and said, "We need someone who works hard," Clara felt something inside her stand up. At Rosebridge, Clara was no longer surrounded by chandeliers, but she found something better than beauty. Opportunity hidden inside neglect. The front desk system was outdated. The laundry schedule wasted hours. The breakfast service irritated guests because no one restocked before complaints began. The staff was not lazy. They were tired, understaffed, and used to being blamed for problems leadership never solved. Clara began making notes. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. If towels were moved closer to the second floor, if check-in scripts were warmer, if housekeeping rotations protected the older employees from the heaviest rooms. The owner, Mr. Alvarez, noticed after the first month. "You write everything down," he said one afternoon, watching Clara tape a new supply chart inside the storage closet. "Only the things that keep going wrong," Clara answered. He looked amused. "And do you know how to fix them?" Clara hesitated. Then she thought of Ethan Whitmore's cold eyes, Vivian's perfect lie, and every manager who had mistaken authority for wisdom. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." Mr. Alvarez let her try one change, then another, then another. Within 6 months, complaints dropped. Rooms turned faster without exhausting staff. Guests began mentioning employees by name in reviews. The Rosebridge Inn did not become luxurious, but it became human. People felt welcome there. Workers felt less disposable there. And Clara, who had once been thrown into the rain like a problem to be removed, discovered she had a gift for building places where people felt they belonged. During those same years, Ethan Whitmore's life looked perfect from far away and increasingly hollow up close. He and Vivian appeared in photographs, attended charity dinners, and stood together beneath the Whitmore Grand chandeliers as if nothing beneath them had ever cracked. But Ethan began noticing things he had once ignored. Vivian's cruelty when no one important watched, his father's impatience with staff, the way managers hid problems instead of solving them because bad news traveled upward like a crime. And sometimes, without warning, he remembered a young housekeeper standing in a corridor saying, "I didn't take anything," with terror and dignity in her face. He never said her name aloud. That was part of his cowardice. If he named Clara Bennett, he would have to name what he had done. It was easier to tell himself he had acted on evidence. The bracelet had been found in her cart. Vivian had cried. Security had confirmed the discovery. What else was he supposed to believe? But memory is patient with guilty men. It returned in quiet moments, asking the same question each time. Did you seek the truth, or did you protect your world from discomfort? Vivian did not remain careful forever. People built on lies often mistake survival for intelligence. The engagement stretched, strained, fractured, and finally collapsed in a scandal that society pages softened into irreconcilable differences. But the truth was uglier. There was another man. There were debts Vivian had hidden. There were favors Ethan's family had quietly paid to make disappear. And when money stopped making her feel safe, Vivian left with the grace of someone abandoning a burning house she had helped set on fire. By then, Clara had become assistant manager at Rosebridge. Then manager. Then, when Mr. Alvarez decided to retire and offered her a small ownership share in exchange for rebuilding the business, Clara signed the papers with hands that trembled for an entirely different reason than fear. She still rode the bus some mornings. She still visited her mother with discount flowers. She still carried the scar of the Whitmore Grand. But the scar no longer told her she was small. It reminded her how far she had walked after being thrown away. 5 years after the gala, Clara stood in the lobby of the Rosebridge Inn watching a new sign being installed outside. The hotel was modest, profitable, and known now for the warmth of its service. Her mother had lived long enough to see Clara promoted, long enough to whisper, "You became the kind of leader people can breathe around." That sentence meant more than any award. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Julian Pierce, the attorney who handled the Rosebridge expansion, called with news that made Clara go completely still. The Whitmore Grand was quietly seeking buyers, and for the first time in 5 years, the door Clara had promised to walk through began to open. Clara Bennett did not become powerful all at once. Power, the kind that lasts, did not arrive for her in a limousine or a sudden inheritance or a room full of people clapping because her name had finally mattered. It came slowly, disguised as early mornings, late nights, unpaid lessons, difficult conversations, and decisions that no one else wanted to make. At Rosebridge Inn, she learned that leadership was not standing above people. It was standing close enough to understand what their work cost them. And because Clara had once been invisible, she knew exactly where to look for the people nobody else saw. She started with the laundry room. Most managers started with the lobby because that was where guests formed first impressions. Clara started where the sheets came back stained, where the carts jammed in narrow hallways, where older employees lifted more weight than their bodies could forgive. She spent 3 mornings folding linens beside the staff before suggesting a new system. No speeches, no clipboards used like weapons, just listening, measuring, adjusting. Within 2 weeks, turnover time improved, and the women in housekeeping stopped looking at her as if management meant betrayal. Then she changed the front desk. Not the furniture first, not the uniforms, the language. Guests were no longer problems. They were tired people arriving from somewhere. Complaints were no longer attacks. They were clues, sometimes unfair, sometimes useful, always worth understanding before reacting. Clara trained the staff to greet returning guests by name and first-time guests with enough warmth that no one felt like a reservation number. Rosebridge could not compete with marble or chandeliers, so Clara made it compete with humanity. Reviews began to change before revenue did. One guest wrote that the inn felt like being expected. Another said the rooms were simple, but the staff made her feel safe after a painful divorce. A traveling nurse left a note saying Rosebridge was the first place in weeks where someone had asked if she had eaten. Clara kept those reviews in a folder, not because she needed praise, but because they proved something she had believed since the night she was thrown into the rain. Luxury without dignity was decoration. Service without humanity was just obedience in a nicer uniform. Julian Pierce entered Clara's life the year Rosebridge nearly expanded too quickly. He was a calm, meticulous attorney with silver at his temples, careful eyes, and a habit of reading every contract as if danger enjoyed hiding in polite sentences. Mr. Alvarez had brought him in to review a financing proposal. Clara had been suspicious of him at first because men in tailored suits still made some old part of her brace for impact. But Julian did not talk over her. He did not explain her own business back to her. He listened, asked sharp questions, and then told her the deal would have trapped Rosebridge in debt within 18 months. "You need slower money," Julian said after the meeting. Clara frowned. "I thought money was money?" "No," he replied. "Fast money usually wants to own the room before you finish painting it." Clara had smiled despite herself. From that day forward, Julian became the kind of advisor she had never known existed. Protective without being possessive, intelligent without making her feel small, and honest enough to tell her when ambition was outrunning wisdom. There was no romance between them, only trust, which in Clara's life was rarer and more valuable. With Julian's help, Rosebridge grew carefully. A second property came first, a neglected lakeside lodge that other investors dismissed because the roof leaked and the furniture looked older than the guest. Clara walked through it once and saw not decay, but bones. Good light in the breakfast room, a view guests would remember. Staff who looked defeated, not incapable. She made an offer small enough to be laughed at and patient enough to be accepted 3 months later. Then she did what she did best. She restored the people before restoring the walls. By the end of the second year, hospitality blogs had begun mentioning her name, not loudly, not with the worship they reserved for luxury empires, but with curiosity. A former housekeeper turning forgotten hotels into places people loved to return to, a woman who built profit by treating staff well, a manager who knew the price of every towel and the birthday of every night auditor. Clara read the articles late at night and felt pride mixed with something quieter. She was becoming visible, but this time, visibility belonged to her. Meanwhile, the Whitmore Grand was rotting behind its shine. From the outside, it still looked untouchable. The marble floors still reflected chandeliers. The suites still carried the Whitmore name in gold, but people who worked there knew better. Staff turnover was rising. Longtime employees were leaving without farewell parties. Guests complained that the service felt colder, slower, emptier. The hotel had beauty but no heartbeat, and for the first time in its history, beauty was not enough to keep the numbers from falling. Ethan Whitmore noticed too late. After Vivian left, after his father's health declined, after investors began asking questions with smiles that felt like knives, Ethan found himself sitting alone in boardrooms that echoed with decisions he had once made too easily. He had inherited authority but not wisdom. He knew how to command but not how to listen. He knew how to protect a brand but not how to protect the people carrying it on their backs. The hotel empire that had made him untouchable was beginning to expose him. And exposure, he discovered, was different from accountability. Some nights, Ethan walked the service corridors alone. He told himself he was inspecting operations, checking standards, making sure the old hotel did not decline under his watch. But in the corridor outside the presidential suite, he always slowed. Memory waited there with the patience of a creditor, a gray uniform, a trembling voice. "I didn't take anything." He could still hear his own answer, calm and brutal. "People like you don't belong in places like this." He had apologized to no one. That was the fact that grew heavier as the years passed. He had not asked where Clara went. He had not checked whether the accusation was followed by proof. He had not demanded a deeper investigation because the first version of the story had protected the evening, protected Vivian, protected the hotel, and protected him from inconvenience. Cowardice, Ethan learned, did not always look like fear. Sometimes it looked like efficiency. Sometimes it wore a tuxedo and called itself leadership. When Clara heard the Whitmore Grand was quietly seeking buyers, she did not celebrate. That surprised her. For years, she had imagined the hotel as a mountain she would one day stand above. But when Julian placed the confidential summary in front of her, all she felt at first was a deep stillness. The numbers were worse than she expected: debt pressure, brand decline, deferred maintenance, staff instability, a reputation polished from far away and cracked up close. The palace was bleeding behind the curtains. Julian watched her read. "You do not have to pursue this?" Clara looked up. "I know. I mean that. Buying pain is still buying pain, even when it comes with marble floors." She almost smiled, but the old ache kept her serious. "This is not about revenge." "Good," Julian said, "because revenge makes terrible financial projections." This time, she did smile. Then she looked back at the hotel summary and felt the strange weight of a door opening from the other side. "I know that building," Clara said quietly. Julian nodded. "You know what it did to you?" "No," she said, turning a page. "I know what it does to people." That was the difference that mattered. If she bought the Whitmore Grand only to prove Ethan wrong, the hotel would remain a monument to humiliation. But if she bought it to change the culture that had made her humiliation possible, then maybe the past would finally have to serve something other than pain. Clara tapped the page where staff complaints had been summarized in sterile language. "These are not numbers. These are people asking to breathe." The acquisition process took months. Quiet calls, legal reviews, financial partners who trusted Clara because Rosebridge had become proof of her discipline. A late-night meeting where Julian warned her twice that the Whitmore family would resist losing control. A bank presentation where one investor asked whether she was emotionally compromised by her history with the property. Clara looked him in the eye and said, "I am emotionally informed." The room went silent. Julian looked down at his papers to hide his smile, and the deal kept moving. The final meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning at the Whitmore Grand. Clara stood in front of her closet that day for longer than she wanted to admit. She chose a cream blouse, a tailored navy coat, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, and black heels comfortable enough to walk every floor if needed. She did not dress to intimidate. She did not dress to prove wealth. She dressed like a woman who had survived being misjudged and no longer needed costume or permission. Before leaving, she opened the old notebook she had carried the night she was fired. The pages were worn now, the ink still blurred where rain had touched it years before. Between old class schedules and hotel notes, she found the promise she had written after the service door closed behind her. "One day, I will walk through the front entrance." Clara touched the sentence with one finger. Then she closed the notebook, placed it in her bag, and met Julian downstairs. When their car stopped in front of the Whitmore Grand, the doorman opened the main entrance without knowing the woman stepping out had once been thrown into the alley. Clara lifted her head, walked toward the golden doors, and this time, no one stopped her. The lobby of the Whitmore Grand looked almost exactly as Clara remembered it. That was what unsettled her most. The same crystal chandeliers poured gold across the same marble floor. The same tall columns rose toward painted ceilings. The same scent of lilies, polish, and expensive perfume moved through the air as if the hotel had preserved itself inside a glass case. For a moment, Clara was 24 again, walking carefully in a gray housekeeping uniform, praying not to be noticed by the wrong person. Then Julian stepped beside her and said quietly, "Ms. Bennett?" And the present returned. "Ms. Bennett." Clara let the name settle into her spine. Not Clara from housekeeping, not the accused girl in the corridor, not the woman escorted out through the service door. Ms. Bennett, majority partner of Rosebridge Hospitality Group, preferred buyer for the Whitmore Grand acquisition, and the woman whose signature could decide the future of the hotel that had once decided she did not belong. She looked toward the grand staircase, breathed once, and walked forward. The doorman had greeted her politely. The concierge had smiled with professional warmth. A junior manager hurried over with a tablet and asked if she needed assistance. No one recognized her. That should have pleased her, but it didn't. It reminded her how easily people forgot the faces they wounded from above. Clara gave her name, and the manager's posture changed immediately. "Ms. Bennett, of course. The board is expecting you in the Windsor room." For the first time in her life, the Whitmore Grand made space for her. As they crossed the lobby, Clara noticed everything leadership had stopped seeing. A tired front desk agent smiling too hard. A bellman rubbing his wrist after lifting too many bags. A housekeeper moving quickly with her eyes lowered, stepping aside before a guest even reached her. The hotel still glittered, but beneath the shine, fatigue lived in the corners. Clara knew that kind of exhaustion. It had a sound, a pace, a posture. Julian leaned slightly toward her. "You're already working, aren't you?" "I never stopped," she said. The Windsor Room had hosted charity luncheons, investor receptions, and the sort of private meetings where men decided the fate of people whose names they never learned. Today, it held a polished table, a tray of untouched coffee, several tense executives, and the last fragments of Whitmore family pride. Clara entered with Julian at her side. Conversation softened, then stopped. The chairman stood. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming." Clara shook his hand. "Thank you for receiving us." Margaret Hayes stood near the far wall, older now, silver threaded through her dark hair, a folder pressed against her chest. She had been invited as acting operations liaison, though Clara suspected no one in the room understood how much she knew. Their eyes met. For 1 second, Margaret's composure broke. Recognition moved across her face like light through a closed curtain. Clara gave the smallest nod. Margaret's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Not yet. Some reunions needed privacy, and this room did not deserve it. The meeting began without Ethan. That fact was mentioned with careful embarrassment by the chairman, who said Mr. Whitmore had been delayed by an urgent call. Clara made no comment. She listened as executives explained declining revenue, brand preservation, deferred capital needs, and the importance of maintaining the Whitmore legacy. Julian took notes. Clara watched faces. The men spoke of legacy as if legacy lived in logos and brass plaques. She thought of laundry rooms, service elevators, staff lockers, and a woman in a gray uniform standing in the rain. "Before we discuss brand language," as Clara said calmly, "I want to discuss employee retention, internal reporting structures, and the unresolved staff complaints from the last 7 years." The room shifted. A financial officer cleared his throat. "With respect, those issues are operational details." "The acquisition conversation is broader." Clara turned to him. "No, those issues are the foundation. If a hotel cannot protect the people who carry it, it does not have a brand. It has a costume." Julian kept his eyes on the page, but the corner of his mouth moved. Margaret looked down quickly as if hiding something more fragile than agreement. The chairman folded his hands. "Ms. Bennett, we appreciate your people-centered approach. However, the Whitmore Grand is a luxury institution." "Then it should know that excellence begins where guests do not look," Clara replied. The room went very still. No one knew what to do with a woman who spoke gently and still refused to yield. Clara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The authority she carried had been built, not inherited. The door opened 20 minutes into the meeting. Everyone looked up. Ethan Whitmore stepped inside wearing a dark suit, his expression controlled, his phone still in his hand. He looked older than Clara remembered, though not less handsome. There were lines of fatigue near his eyes now, and something quieter in his posture, as if pride had become a coat too heavy to keep wearing comfortably. "I apologize for the delay," he said. Then his gaze moved to the woman seated across the table, and the sentence died before he finished breathing. Clara watched recognition take him apart in silence. At first confusion, then disbelief, then memory. His eyes lowered almost involuntarily, as if searching for the gray uniform that was no longer there. He found instead a tailored navy coat, pearl earrings, steady hands, and a woman who did not flinch beneath his stare. For 5 years, Clara had wondered what she would feel when Ethan Whitmore finally saw her again. Triumph, rage, relief. What she felt was something colder and cleaner. Completion. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was professional enough to save the room from embarrassment and personal enough to wound only him. "I believe we have business to discuss." Ethan's hand tightened around his phone. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Ms. Bennett." Hearing her name from his mouth did not heal anything, but it corrected something. Once he had used her namelessness as a weapon. Now he had to speak the name she had carried back through the front door. The chairman, unaware of the full history but sensitive to the sudden tension, gestured toward the empty chair. "Ethan, Ms. Bennett's group has raised operational concerns that we should address before final terms." Ethan sat slowly. His eyes did not leave Clara for long. "You have concerns?" he asked. "I have standards," Clara replied. A silence followed, not dramatic enough for outsiders to understand, but sharp enough for Ethan to feel the blade of it. Julian placed a document in front of her. Clara opened it. For the next hour, she spoke with precision. Staff protections, back wages owed through misclassified overtime, maintenance failures hidden from guest-facing reports, a culture where complaints moved down faster than solutions moved up. She did not mention the bracelet. She did not mention the hallway. She did not mention the rain. That restraint unsettled Ethan more than accusation would have. He had prepared, in some buried corner of himself, for her anger. He had not prepared for her competence. Once he had dismissed her in seconds. Now he was forced to listen for an hour, while she diagnosed the hotel more clearly than people who had owned it for generations. She knew which departments were understaffed. She knew which guest experiences failed because employees were afraid to report problems. She knew where luxury had become theater and where service had become silent suffering. Ethan watched her turn pages, ask questions, and hold executives accountable without cruelty. and with every answer she gave, he understood more fully the violence of what he had once said. People like you don't belong in places like this. At the end of the meeting, the chairman announced the proposed transition structure. Rosebridge Hospitality would assume majority ownership after final due diligence. Several Whitmore executives would depart. A few would remain temporarily to support continuity. Then the chairman hesitated and glanced at Ethan. Mr. Whitmore has requested a transitional operations role during the first 90 days, pending buyer approval. The room held its breath. Clara looked at Ethan. For the first time since he entered, he looked away. Julian leaned toward Clara and murmured, "You are under no obligation." She knew that. Everyone knew that. She could remove Ethan from the hotel before sunset. She could make him feel, in one signature, the powerlessness he had once handed to her. But Clara had not come back to become the same kind of person who wounded her. She folded her hands on the table and studied him. "If Mr. Whitmore remains," she said, "he will report directly to me. No inherited authority, no private decisions, no interference with staff reforms." Ethan lifted his eyes. "I understand." Clara stood, and the room rose with her. That small movement almost undid her. Years ago, she had been escorted out while people watched her fall. Now the same hotel stood because she was leaving. She gathered her notebook, the old one, the one with rain-blurred pages, and slipped it into her bag. As she passed Ethan near the door, he said softly, "Clara?" She paused but did not turn fully. His voice was rough. "I should have asked the truth that night." Clara looked at him then, calm and unreadable. "Yes," she said, "you should have." Ethan Whitmore had never reported to anyone inside the hotel that carried his family name. Not truly. There had been board members, advisors, consultants, and his father's shadow pressing against every major decision, but no one had ever looked across a table and placed limits around his authority with the calm precision Clara Bennett had used. For the first time in his life, he walked through the Whitmore Grand not as the heir whose presence made staff straighten, but as a temporary operations advisor whose access could be revoked by the woman he had once dismissed. The irony was not subtle. It followed him through the lobby like a second set of footsteps, and every time someone called her Ms. Bennett, Ethan felt the past answer. Clara did not begin by changing the chandeliers, the lobby flowers, or the expensive artwork that impressed guests for 3 seconds before they looked at their phones. She began with the staff entrance. The paint was peeling, the security light flickered, the time clock was mounted beside a leaking pipe no executive had seen because no executive had entered that way in years. Clara stood there on her first official morning with Ethan, Margaret, Julian, and 2 department managers beside her. "This is where the hotel tells its employees what it thinks of them," she said. No one answered. No one needed to. Ethan looked at the narrow hallway, the scuffed floor, the cracked bulletin board crowded with outdated notices. He had passed through the grand lobby thousands of times and had almost never come here. That fact embarrassed him more than he expected. Clara noticed his silence but did not rescue him from it. Instead, she asked Margaret to explain the current staff arrival process, locker assignments, meal breaks, and reporting procedures for misconduct. Margaret spoke steadily, but Ethan heard what lived beneath her words. Too little space, too little time, too little respect. The hotel had been running on dignity it never paid back. The first week under Clara's leadership felt less like a transition and more like an excavation. She opened storage rooms, reviewed schedules, walked guest floors, inspected employee areas, and asked questions that made managers uncomfortable because they could not answer them honestly. Ethan followed when required. Sometimes he spoke. More often, he listened. He watched Clara kneel beside a housekeeper's cart to check whether the lower shelves were damaging backs. He watched her ask a night auditor what made him feel unsafe after midnight. He watched her remember names after hearing them once. None of it looked like revenge. That made it harder to bear. He had imagined, in his most ashamed moments, that Clara would return with anger sharpened into cruelty. He had expected public corrections, humiliating assignments, perhaps the cold satisfaction of making him small in front of the people who once feared him. But Clara did not waste her power that way. She gave him tasks that mattered and offered no comfort when they revealed what he did not know. She sent him to review housekeeping workflow with Margaret. She had him observe front desk complaints without interrupting. She required him to attend the staff listening session and forbade him from speaking unless someone asked him a direct question. Listening is not waiting for your turn, she told him. It is work. At the staff listening session, Ethan sat in a plain chair near the back of a conference room where employees gathered with cautious faces. For years, he had attended investor meetings where people praised the Whitmore standard. Here, he heard what that standard had cost. A housekeeper described skipping lunch to finish assigned rooms. A bellman admitted he had stopped reporting injuries because supervisors called it weakness. A front desk agent said guests were allowed to abuse staff as long as they were wealthy enough to complain afterward. Ethan kept his hands folded and his mouth closed. Every word felt like a bill coming due. Then an older laundry worker named Denise looked directly at Clara. "Ms. Bennett, people ask us for honesty when they already know the answer they want. Is this going to be like that?" The room tensed. Clara did not flinch. "No," she said, "but I understand why you are asking." Denise's eyes narrowed. "Understanding is easy. Changing policy is harder," Clara replied. "That is why every concern raised today will be documented, answered, and assigned a timeline. And if leadership fails to follow through, you will know exactly who failed you." She paused. "That includes me." Ethan looked at her then, and something inside him shifted with painful clarity. This was what authority should have looked like. Not perfection, not distance, not a name powerful enough to end conversation, authority that made itself accountable. Clara did not ask the staff to trust her because she owned the hotel now. She created a structure where trust could grow because consequences would no longer land only on the powerless. Ethan felt admiration rise in him, immediate and unwanted. It did not erase guilt, it sharpened it. After the session, he found Margaret in the housekeeping office, sorting old files into labeled boxes. "She is good," he said quietly. Margaret did not look up. She always was. The answer struck harder than he expected. Ethan stood by the doorway, feeling like a man who had arrived years late to an obvious truth. Margaret slid one drawer open and removed a small envelope yellowed at the edges. "I kept something," she said. Her voice had changed. Not angry, not soft. Tired. Inside the envelope was Clara's old employee badge. The photo showed a younger Clara in a gray uniform, hair pulled back, eyes serious but hopeful. Beside it was a folded note in Margaret's handwriting. She deserved better. Ethan stared at the badge until the room blurred around its edges. He remembered the hallway, the bracelet, Vivian's tears, Clara's voice trying to survive his certainty. Margaret watched him without pity. "I should have fought harder," she said. Ethan's throat tightened. "So should I." "No," Margaret answered. "You should have listened at all." That evening, Clara found Ethan alone in the darkened ballroom, the same ballroom where his engagement gala had once filled the air with music and applause. Now the chandeliers were dimmed, the tables gone, the marble floor bare enough to reflect shadows. Ethan stood near the center, Clara's old badge in his hand. For a moment, she almost turned away. Seeing him with that piece of her past felt too intimate, as if he had touched a wound without asking. Then he looked up, and the devastation in his face stopped her. "Margaret gave it to me," he said. Clara's eyes lowered to the badge. "I wondered where that went." "I am sorry," he said. The words were quiet, and Clara hated how much they still had the power to hurt. "You have said that before." "I know." "Then say something truer." Ethan looked at the badge again. For once, he did not reach for elegance. "I was cruel because it was easier than being uncertain." The sentence settled between them like a confession with bones. Clara folded her arms, not defensively, but to keep herself steady. Uncertain about what? About Vivian, about the hotel, about the possibility that our world was not as clean as we pretended. His voice roughened. "When the bracelet appeared in your cart, believing you guilty protected everything I already understood. Believing you innocent would have required me to question the people beside me." Clara's expression did not change, but her eyes did. "And I was easier to sacrifice." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The honesty did not heal her, but it mattered, not because it excused him, because it finally named the thing he had done. Clara took one slow step closer. "You did not just believe a lie, Ethan. You benefited from it." He opened his eyes. "I know. You kept your gala elegant. You protected Vivian. You protected your family name. You protected the hotel's image." Her voice trembled, but she held it firm. "And I walked into the rain carrying the cost." Ethan looked at her as if every word was deserved, because it was. "I cannot change that night," he said. "No," Clara replied, "you cannot. But I can make sure the hotel never becomes that kind of place again." Clara studied him carefully. There was a time when she might have wanted to hear him promise he would fix everything. Now she understood that repair was slower than declaration. "Do not make the hotel better because you feel guilty about me," she said. "Make it better because the people here deserved better before you felt guilty." Ethan nodded, the words entering him fully. They did. For a long moment, they stood in the room where their lives had first broken against each other. The air carried no music now, no applause, no Vivian glittering under the lights. Only memory, honesty, and the strange ache of two people seeing the past without its decorations. Ethan held out the badge. Clara did not take it at first. Then she stepped forward and accepted it from his hand. Their fingers did not touch, but both of them felt the almost. It was not romance yet. It was something more fragile. Recognition. The next morning, Clara announced the first wave of reforms: paid meal breaks protected by schedule, a direct reporting line for staff mistreatment, guest conduct standards that allowed employees to refuse abusive treatment without fear of punishment. A renovation plan beginning with staff spaces before luxury suites. Some executives looked horrified, some staff looked skeptical. Ethan looked at Clara from across the room and understood that she was not rebuilding the Whitmore Grand to prove him wrong. She was rebuilding it because she had always known what belonging should feel like. That made him respect her more than he had ever respected anyone. Later that day, Ethan was assigned to shadow housekeeping for a full shift. No title, no private office, no authority beyond what Clara allowed. He changed into a simple work shirt, pushed a linen cart down the corridor, and listened as Margaret explained the room turnover process with unforgiving detail. Near the presidential suite, he stopped for half a second. The hallway seemed quieter than the rest. Margaret noticed but said nothing. Ethan looked at the closed door, then at the cart in front of him. For the first time, he understood that humility was not humiliation. Humility was finally seeing the work his pride had refused to honor. The truth did not return to the Whitmore Grand as a thunderclap. It returned the way rot reveals itself in an old wall, first as a stain, then as a crack, then as something no amount of paint can hide. Clara had not asked Julian to investigate the night of the gala. At least not at first. She had told herself the hotel needed her attention in the present, not her pain in the past. But old lies have a way of protecting themselves inside systems, and as Julian reviewed contracts, security records, and archived personnel files, Clara's name appeared where it should have been erased, not as a thief, as an unfinished question. Julian brought the first file to Clara's temporary office on a gray afternoon when rain tapped softly against the tall windows. He placed it on her desk and did not sit until she looked up. That night, he said carefully, was never properly investigated. Clara felt her hand still over the staffing report she had been reading. For 5 years, she had known that. Knowing it and seeing proof of it were different kinds of pain. "What did you find?" she asked. Julian's expression tightened. "Missing footage, altered logs. A security officer paid through a consulting account 2 days after your termination." The room seemed to narrow. Clara looked at the file but did not touch it. For years, she had lived with the loneliness of being the only person certain of her innocence. Now, evidence sat in front of her, and instead of relief, she felt nausea. Truth had arrived late enough to feel almost cruel. "Who authorized the payment?" she asked. Julian opened the folder. The account belonged to a private events company connected to Vivian Cross. Clara closed her eyes. Vivian? The name had always lived in the story like perfume over poison. Ethan learned about the file from Margaret before Clara told him. Not because Margaret meant to betray Clara's confidence, but because Ethan found her standing alone in the service corridor outside the old security office, holding a copy of the archive schedule with shaking hands. He asked what was wrong. Margaret looked at him for a long time before answering. "You were not the only one who failed her," she said. The sentence stopped him cold. Then she handed him the paper. On the night Clara was accused, the guard assigned to the presidential suite had left his post for 11 minutes. The log had been changed afterward. Ethan read the page once, then again, his face losing color. He had spent 5 years hiding behind the bracelet found in Clara's cart. Evidence, he had told himself. Procedure, he had told himself. But procedure had been broken before Clara was ever accused. Evidence had been handled by people with reasons to lie. And he, Ethan Whitmore, had accepted it because accepting it had been convenient. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. Margaret watched him without mercy. "Now you know what your certainty was worth?" Vivian returned to the Whitmore Grand 3 days later. She arrived in a cream coat, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of confidence that usually entered rooms before consequences did. The lobby staff recognized her immediately, though most pretended not to. Clara was in a meeting with facilities when the front desk called. "Ms. Bennett," the agent said quietly, "Vivian Cross is asking for Mr. Whitmore. She says it is urgent." Clara looked across the table at Julian. He did not seem surprised. People like Vivian often appeared when secrets stopped feeling safely buried. Ethan met Vivian in the small private lounge near the east corridor, but Clara and Julian were present by choice, not accident. Vivian removed her sunglasses slowly, her eyes moving over Clara with practiced disdain. "Well," she said, "this is almost poetic." Clara did not answer. Ethan stood near the fireplace, tense and pale. "What do you want, Vivian?" She smiled at him as if they were still standing beneath chandeliers and applause. "I want to prevent you from making a sentimental mistake that will ruin what is left of your family's name." Julian placed a recorder on the table. Vivian's smile thinned. Is that necessary? It is, Julian said. Her eyes flicked toward Clara. Still hiding behind other people, Clara? The old version of Clara might have flinched. This one only folded her hands. No, I learned to bring witnesses when dealing with people who rewrite rooms after they leave them. Ethan looked at Clara, and for one brief moment, something like admiration crossed his face before shame swallowed it. Vivian turned back to Ethan. You do realize what she is doing, don't you? She's using an old grudge to take what your family built? Clara's voice remained calm. Your concern for the Whitmore family is touching, considering how quickly you abandoned it when the money became inconvenient. Vivian's eyes sharpened. There are things you do not understand. I understand enough, Clara said. I understand a bracelet was planted. I understand a guard was paid. I understand footage disappeared. What I do not understand is why you believe no one would ever look. For the first time, Vivian's elegance cracked. Only slightly, but Ethan saw it. The woman who had once cried perfectly in his arms looked suddenly irritated, not wounded. Careful, she said. Julian opened another folder. That sounds like a threat. It is advice. Then allow me to offer some in return, Julian said. Anything you say from this point forward should be true enough to survive discovery. Vivian leaned back, and the room cooled around her. Ethan took one step closer. Did you plant the bracelet? Vivian looked at him with something almost like pity. You are still so dramatic? Answer me. She was a maid who heard something she should not have heard. The sentence fell into the room like glass breaking. Clara did not move. Ethan did. He stepped back as if Vivian had struck him. For 5 years, the truth had waited behind one sentence, and now it stood there, naked, ugly, undeniable. Vivian realized too late what she had admitted. Her mouth tightened. That is not a confession. Julian's eyes remained cold. It is close enough to invite several questions. Ethan's voice was low. What did she hear? Vivian laughed once, bitterly. Nothing that matters now. It mattered enough for you to destroy her life. Vivian looked at Clara then, truly looked, and hatred flashed through the polish. She was in the wrong place. Clara finally stood. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it cut cleanly through the room. I was in the place I was assigned to work. I was carrying towels. I was doing my job. You were protecting your lie. Vivian's face flushed. You have become very impressive for someone so wounded. Clara smiled sadly. That is what people like you never understand. Wounds do not always make people smaller. Ethan lowered his eyes. He knew that sentence was not only for Vivian. The formal unraveling took longer than the admission itself. Julian sent documents to the proper authorities. The old security guard, now living 3 states away, agreed to cooperate when faced with payment records and possible charges. He admitted Vivian had given him cash to leave the corridor unsecured and later adjust the log. He had not known exactly what she intended. Or perhaps he had known enough and preferred payment over conscience. The partial camera archive recovered from a neglected backup showed Vivian placing something in Clara's cart before the scream. The image was grainy. It was enough. Clara watched the footage in a private room with Julian, Margaret, and Ethan. She had thought seeing proof would release her. Instead, she felt the old hallway close around her again. There she was, younger, tired, careful, innocent. There, Vivian was, glancing over her shoulder before slipping the bracelet into the cart. There were the minutes that had changed Clara's life, playing silently on a screen while everyone finally saw what she had known from the beginning. Margaret cried first. Julian removed his glasses. Ethan did not move at all. When the footage ended, Ethan stood and walked out without a word. Clara found him minutes later in the corridor outside the presidential suite. He had one hand against the wall, his head bowed. For a moment he looked less like a Whitmore and more like a man who had reached the bottom of his own reflection and found nothing noble waiting there. I saw it, he said, though she had not spoken. I saw the exact moment I should have protected the truth, and instead I protected my life from being uncomfortable. Clara stood several feet away. That is what I have been living with. The public correction came the next morning. Clara did not ask for it. Ethan insisted. He gathered senior staff, department heads, and the remaining board representatives in the ballroom, the same ballroom where the engagement gala had once glittered over a lie. This time, there were no cameras, no champagne, no Vivian, only employees standing shoulder to shoulder while Ethan stepped forward, holding no notes. His face was pale, but his voice did not hide. 5 years ago, Clara Bennett was falsely accused inside this hotel. I believed that accusation without seeking the truth. The room went utterly still. Ethan turned toward Clara, who stood near Margaret and Julian. I humiliated her publicly. I took part in damaging her name, her work, and her future. She was innocent, and I was wrong. The words did not erase the rain, the lost jobs, the years of carrying shame that had never belonged to her, but they entered the room like air after a sealed door opened. Ethan faced the staff again. "I'm sorry." Not because the truth came out, because the truth was always there, and I chose not to look. Afterward, he approached Clara with eyes full of grief. She listened until he finished, then said quietly, "An apology is not a key, Ethan. It does not open every door you closed." Ethan Whitmore had apologized before. He had apologized to investors when quarterly numbers disappointed them, to guests when a suite was not ready, to journalists when a family scandal needed softening, to board members when a decision required diplomacy instead of truth. Those apologies had been polished, useful, and empty enough to survive public consumption. But after Clara stood in the ballroom and told him an apology was not a key, Ethan understood something he should have learned years earlier. Regret was not the same as repair. And sorrow, no matter how sincere, did not give him the right to enter the life he had helped close. The first thing he did was not ask to speak with Clara. That surprised everyone, including himself. Instead, he asked Julian to prepare a formal statement correcting the record, naming Clara's innocence clearly, and accepting his own responsibility without language designed to protect the Whitmore reputation. Julian read the first draft and crossed out 3 entire paragraphs. "This sounds like a brand protecting itself from liability," he said. Ethan took the paper back, sat alone in the conference room for 2 hours, and rewrote it by hand. When he returned, Julian read it once, then nodded. "Now it sounds like a man telling the truth." The statement went to every hotel association, employer, and licensing contact that had received, directly or indirectly, the shadow of Clara's old accusation. It also went into the Whitmore Grand Employee Archive, not hidden in legal language, but attached to her original personnel file. Clara Bennett had been innocent. Clara Bennett had been wrongfully accused. Clara Bennett had been publicly humiliated by leadership that failed to investigate. Ethan signed his full name beneath those sentences. Not because a signature could restore 5 years, because the lie had traveled with authority, and the truth needed authority to follow it. Then he resigned from the Whitmore Family Advisory Board. The decision sent a small earthquake through the remaining executives. His father's old allies called it emotional recklessness. A board member warned that stepping back would weaken his claim to whatever legacy remained. Ethan listened, then answered with a calm that surprised even him. "I have confused legacy with control for most of my life." No one knew what to say to that. For the first time, Ethan did not need their approval to prove he still mattered. He was beginning to understand that importance built on fear was only loneliness with better furniture. Clara heard about the resignation from Margaret, not Ethan. She was reviewing the new staff meal schedule when Margaret entered with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman carrying news she did not intend to decorate. "He stepped down," Margaret said. Clara looked up. "From what?" "The board." Clara's pen stilled. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Margaret placed the coffee beside her. "He did not ask anyone to tell you. That is why I am telling you." Clara leaned back slowly. She wanted the news to mean nothing. It would have been easier if Ethan's changes felt theatrical, obvious attempts to purchase her softness with visible sacrifice. But he was not standing in front of her with his resignation folded like an offering. He was not asking for gratitude. He was not making his loss her responsibility. That made the ache inside her more complicated. Healing had been easier when he was only the man who hurt her. Now he was becoming a man who understood that hurting her had revealed something broken in himself. Still, Clara kept her distance. She had learned to respect time more than emotion. A trembling apology could be real in the moment and still not survive ordinary Tuesdays. She watched Ethan from across meeting rooms, service corridors, and renovation walkthroughs. He arrived early. He did not interrupt staff. He took notes when housekeeping spoke. When guests complained abusively, he no longer smiled and promised them invisible punishments. He stood beside the employee and calmly enforced the new conduct policy. Every time he did the right thing without looking to see if Clara noticed, a small locked place in her heart heard the sound. One evening, during a storm that rattled the tall windows of the ballroom, Ethan found an old letter in his private office. It had been folded inside a book he had not opened in years. The envelope was unsealed, yellowed slightly at the edges, and addressed to no one. He knew what it was before he read it. The letter he had written the night Clara was thrown out. Not an apology exactly, a confession he had been too proud and too afraid to send. He sat at his desk and opened it with hands that felt colder than they should have. The words were younger, sharper, full of excuses trying to dress themselves as doubt. Something about her face unsettled me. Vivian cried, but the maid looked terrified in a way I cannot forget. If she is guilty, why do I feel like I punished the wrong person? Ethan stared at the page for a long time. There it was, proof that his conscience had spoken the same night, and he had chosen not to follow it. He had not been ignorant. He had been unwilling. That truth hurt worse than the letter deserved. He almost burned it, then he almost kept it hidden. Both choices felt familiar. Control damage, manage shame. Preserve the image of a man who had only recently understood his mistake. But Clara had not suffered because he lacked private regret. She had suffered because his regret never became action when action could have mattered. So he placed the letter in a plain envelope and wrote her name on the front. Not Ms. Bennett, not Clara from housekeeping, just Clara. Then he waited until he could give it to her without asking her to comfort him. The chance came 3 nights later on the rooftop terrace of the Whitmore Grand. Clara went there after a long meeting because the air in boardrooms sometimes made old wounds feel too close. The city spread below in silver and amber lights. The rain had stopped, leaving the stone railing damp beneath her fingertips. She found Ethan already there, standing far enough away from the door that she could leave without passing him. He turned when he heard her, then immediately stepped aside. "I can go," he said. Clara looked at the open sky, then at him. "No, stay." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that did not demand performance. Below them, cars moved like small streams of light. Above them, clouds dragged slowly across the moon. Clara folded her arms against the cold. "I heard about the board." Ethan nodded. "It was overdue." "You keep saying that?" "Because I keep discovering how much was." She almost smiled, but the sadness in his voice stopped it. He did not sound like a man collecting noble phrases. He sounded like a man walking through rooms he had once refused to enter. Ethan held out the envelope, but did not step closer. "I wrote this the night you were fired." Clara looked at it, and her body went very still. "You wrote to me?" "I wrote because I could not sleep." "But you did not send it?" "No." The honesty was immediate, and it cost him. "I told myself the evidence was enough. I told myself reopening the matter would embarrass Vivian, the hotel, the family. I told myself many things." His voice roughened. "The truth is, I was afraid of what my doubt would demand from me." Clara took the envelope slowly. Her fingers brushed the paper, not his hand. For a moment, the terrace disappeared, and she was back in the alley, rain soaking her shoes, wondering whether anyone inside that glowing hotel had questioned what happened after the door closed. Apparently someone had. Apparently he had, and apparently he had still chosen silence. That hurt in a new way, but it also answered an old question she had carried like a stone. She had not imagined the injustice. Even he had felt it. "Why give this to me now?" she asked. "Because you deserve the whole truth, including the parts that make me look worse." Clara looked up at him. The wind moved gently between them. "You understand this does make you look worse?" "Yes." "You doubted my guilt that night and let them throw me out anyway." Ethan's face tightened, but he did not look away. "Yes." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing the clean brutality of the admission. "That is harder to forgive than believing Vivian completely." "I know." For a long time, Clara said nothing. She opened the envelope but did not read the letter yet. Maybe she would later, maybe alone, maybe when the past did not feel so close to the skin. "You keep handing me truth," she said finally. "As if truth is enough to rebuild trust." "It is not," Ethan said. "But lies made the damage. I thought truth should at least stop adding to it." That answer reached her because it did not ask to be rewarded. It simply stood there, plain and difficult. Clara rested both hands on the damp stone railing and looked out over the city. "I spent years thinking I needed to come back here so you would finally see me," she said. Ethan's eyes lowered. "And now? Now I think I needed to come back so I could see myself without that hallway deciding who I was." The words settled into the night. Ethan took them in with reverence. "You were never what I called you." "I know that now," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but it did not break. "That is why your apology cannot be the center of my healing." Ethan nodded, and for the first time, the pain in his face held no defense. "I don't want to be the center," he said. "I want to become someone safe enough to stand near your life, if you ever choose that. And if you never do, I will still be responsible for becoming better than the man who hurt you." Clara turned toward him then. The city lights touched his face, revealing exhaustion, grief, and something she had not seen in him years ago. Humility that had not been forced by humiliation, but chosen through truth. She held the old letter against her chest. "Then keep becoming," she said softly. And for Ethan, who had once thought power meant being obeyed, those 2 words felt like the first mercy he had not earned. The final ownership transfer of the Whitmore Grand was scheduled for the first Monday of autumn. Outside, the trees along the avenue had begun turning gold, and the city air carried the clean edge of a season changing before anyone felt ready. Inside the hotel, change was no longer a rumor. It had touched the staff entrance, the laundry room, the front desk, the guest conduct policy, the break schedules, and the way managers lowered their voices when employees entered the room. The hotel was still learning how to become honest. So was Ethan. And Clara, though she admitted it to no one, was still learning what to do with a heart that had stopped wanting revenge. The board wanted Ethan removed completely. Julian did not say it that bluntly at first because Julian's bluntness usually wore a tailored suit and entered politely. But in Clara's office, with the final transition documents spread across her desk, he made the argument no responsible advisor could avoid. "Ethan Whitmore is a liability," he said. Clara looked up from the papers. "To the hotel? To your piece." The words were careful, but they landed heavily. Julian was not trying to punish Ethan. He was trying to protect her from mistaking transformation for safety too quickly. Margaret had a different answer when Clara asked her privately. They stood together in the renovated staff lounge, where sunlight now came through clean windows and the old broken vending machine had been replaced with a proper coffee station. "Do you think he should leave?" Clara asked. Margaret stirred sugar into her coffee slowly. "I think you should not make a decision for the woman you were in the rain." Clara frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that girl deserved justice. But you are not only her anymore." Margaret looked at her with the gentle severity of someone who had earned the right to speak plainly. "Choose what gives you peace now, not what proves your pain was real. It was real without proof." That sentence followed Clara for the rest of the day. Pain was strange that way. It demanded witnesses long after the wound had closed. For years, Clara had imagined Ethan losing everything in front of her. She had imagined him standing powerless while she held the key. Back then, those fantasies had kept her warm on nights when shame tried to freeze her from the inside. But now, with the key actually in her hand, Clara felt no hunger to destroy him. The absence of that hunger did not mean the past mattered less. It meant the past no longer deserved to make decisions for her. That evening, Clara walked the hotel alone. She began at the front entrance, where guests crossed polished floors beneath chandeliers. Then she moved through the lobby, past the concierge desk, down a side hall, and finally to the service corridor that led to the door where she had once been escorted out. The renovation had not erased it. Clara had insisted on that. The door had been repainted, the light repaired, the lock replaced, but it was still the same exit. She stood before it for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the building around her. Once, that door had been an ending. Now it was only a door. Ethan found her there, though he seemed to regret it the moment he did. "I'm sorry," he said, stopping several feet away. "I didn't know you were here." Clara kept her eyes on the door. "I come here sometimes." He did not ask why. That was new. The old Ethan would have filled the silence with explanation or command. This Ethan waited, as if understanding that some places in her story could not be entered simply because he had arrived. After a while, Clara said, "This used to be the most powerful door in my life." Ethan's voice was quiet. "And now?" Clara touched the cool metal handle. "Now I own the building around it." The words were not triumphant. They were almost sad. Ethan lowered his gaze, absorbing what she did not say. Ownership did not undo exile. Authority did not unmake humiliation, but it changed the direction of her life's gravity. She no longer stood outside waiting to be let in. She no longer needed Ethan Whitmore, or anyone like him, to decide whether she belonged. That knowledge had become stronger than anger, and much harder to lose. "The board wants me gone," Ethan said. Clara turned slightly. "I know. They may be right." "Do you think they are?" He took a breath. "I think part of me deserves to walk away with nothing, but I also think leaving would be easier than staying where I have to remember who I was." Clara studied him. That was not the answer she expected. The old Ethan would have defended his usefulness. This one was naming his fear before turning it into an argument. "What do you want?" she asked. Ethan looked toward the corridor where the staff entrance now stood bright, clean, and open. "I want to learn the hotel from the ground up," he said. "Not as a Whitmore, not as a man people obey because of a name, as someone who has to earn the right to be trusted in a place he helped make unsafe." Clara listened without softening too quickly. "And if I say no?" "Then I will go," he said. "No campaign, no pressure, no wounded pride disguised as disappointment." His eyes met hers. "You owe me nothing, Clara. Not a role, not forgiveness, not a future." She believed that he meant it. That was the problem. Trust did not return as a dramatic certainty. It returned as a difficult possibility, asking to be examined without being rushed. Clara looked at the man standing before her and saw both versions of him, the one who had wounded her and the one who had spent months learning not to defend the wound. Forgiveness had not erased the first, but honesty had made room for the second to exist. And Clara, who had built her entire career on seeing what places could become, wondered if people deserved the same careful patience when they truly chose to change. The next morning, Clara made her decision. She did not announce it in a ballroom. She did not turn it into a symbolic victory or a public punishment. She called Ethan, Julian, Margaret, and the department heads into a small conference room near the operations office. On the table lay a new 90-day development plan. Not an executive role, not a restored family position. A ground-level rotational assignment through housekeeping, front desk, maintenance, staff services, and guest relations, with written evaluations from employees, not executives. Ethan read the first page in silence. Julian's expression remained unreadable. Margaret looked like she might approve, though she would never make it easy. "You will not supervise anyone," Clara said. "You will not represent ownership. You will not override department leads. You will learn." Ethan looked up. "I understand. If at any point staff report that your presence makes the work unsafe or performative, the assignment ends." "I understand." Clara held his gaze. "And this is not forgiveness packaged as employment. This is one chance to become useful without being powerful." For a brief second, emotion moved across Ethan's face, but he mastered it. "Thank you," he said. Clara shook her head. "Do not thank me yet. Earn the evaluations." After the meeting, Julian stayed behind. "You are certain?" he asked. "No." That made him smile faintly. "Good. Certainty has started many terrible decisions." Clara gathered the papers. "I am not choosing him because I trust him completely." "Then why?" "Because I trust myself now." Julian's expression softened, and for once he had no immediate argument. Clara continued almost to herself. 5 years ago, I had no power and he had too much. If I remove him only because I can, I let that night write my leadership. I won't do that." Julian nodded slowly. "That may be the strongest answer you could give." Ethan began the rotation the following week. The first day, he reported to laundry at 6 in the morning wearing a plain work shirt with his name stitched on a temporary badge. Denise, the laundry worker who trusted no one easily, looked him up and down and said, "If you fold towels like a rich man, I'm sending you home." For the first time in months, Ethan laughed without bitterness. "Fair." She handed him a stack so large it nearly hid his face. By mid-morning, his shoulders ached. By noon, he had learned that clean linen did not appear by magic, and that efficiency often meant respecting the bodies of the people doing repetitive work. Clara saw him later through the glass wall of the operations office carrying supplies beside 2 maintenance workers. He was listening more than speaking. That mattered, not because it made him noble. Because once, Ethan Whitmore had believed listening was optional when power already agreed with him. Now he was learning the first language of humility: attention. Margaret stepped beside Clara and followed her gaze. "He is trying," she said. Clara did not look away. "Yes." "Does that make it easier?" Clara thought about the old letter folded inside her desk, the badge in her drawer, the service door behind them. "No," she said, "but it makes it different." The night before the official reopening, Clara entered the ballroom after everyone else had gone. The chandeliers were dimmed low, casting soft gold over restored floors and empty tables waiting for flowers. This room had once been filled with applause while her life collapsed in a corridor nearby. Now it waited under her direction. No Vivian, no false accusation, no guests whispering over stolen dignity. Just silence, polished wood, and the steady knowledge that Clara Bennett had returned without becoming cruel. She walked to the center of the floor and stood there, letting the past approach without letting it take her. Ethan appeared at the entrance but did not step inside until she saw him. "I can come back?" he said. Clara shook her head. "No, come in." He entered slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. For a moment they stood in the room where everything had begun to break, both aware that the air itself seemed to remember. "The flowers arrive at 6, Ethan said, because practical words were safer than emotional ones. Clara almost smiled. "Denise told me you folded towels badly." She was generous. "I folded them terribly." The small humor eased something between them, but only enough to let truth breathe. Clara looked around the ballroom, then back at him. "I thought coming back here would feel like revenge." "And does it?" Ethan asked. "No." Her voice softened. "It feels like taking back the part of me I left in that hallway." Ethan's eyes filled, but he stayed still. "You should never have had to leave any part of yourself here." "I know." She stepped closer, not enough to forgive everything at once, but enough to choose the next beginning. "Tomorrow this hotel reopens, not as your family's monument, not as my revenge. As something better than both." Ethan nodded, humbled, and as the chandeliers glowed above them, Clara understood that the most powerful choice she had made was not buying the hotel. It was refusing to let pain decide what kind of owner, woman, or heart she would become. The Whitmore Grand reopened on a Friday evening beneath a sky the color of polished silver. Golden light poured through the front windows, spilling across the sidewalk where photographers waited. Guests adjusted their coats and staff moved with the controlled excitement of people who knew something important was beginning. For decades, the hotel had been known for marble, chandeliers, wealth, and the Whitmore name carved above the entrance. But that night, something had changed beneath the beauty. The building no longer felt like a palace guarding itself from ordinary people. It felt like a place finally learning how to open its doors without deciding who deserved to enter. Clara Bennett stood alone in the staff corridor 30 minutes before the ceremony. Not because she was afraid of the lobby, not anymore. She stood there because she needed to remember the whole story before stepping into the next one. The walls had been repainted, the lighting repaired, and the old bulletin board replaced with one that held staff announcements, safety policies, training schedules, and handwritten notes of appreciation. It was still a service corridor, but now it looked like a passage used by people whose work mattered. Clara reached into her pocket and touched her old employee badge. She had kept it, not to punish herself, not to keep the wound alive, but to remind herself that dignity did not begin when others recognized it. It had been there in the gray uniform. It had been there in the rain. It had been there when no one believed her, when employers turned silent, when she studied at kitchen tables after working double shifts. The hotel had not given her dignity back. Ownership had not created it. Power had only given the world less permission to ignore what had always been true. Margaret found her there a few minutes later. The older woman wore a navy dress and a silver pin shaped like a small key, a gift Clara had given every department lead that morning. "You know," Margaret said, stopping beside her, "most owners would be upstairs checking flowers or speeches right now." Clara smiled softly. "I'm checking the foundation." Margaret looked down the corridor and nodded. "Stronger than it used to be." "Because people finally started looking at it," Clara said. Margaret's eyes filled. "Your mother would have been very proud." Clara closed her eyes for a second, letting the words reach the place that still missed Elena most. "She used to say belonging is not something rich people hand you," Clara whispered. "It is something God plants in you before anyone learns your name." Margaret touched her arm gently. "Then go remind them." Together they walked from the staff corridor into the grand lobby. This time, Clara did not enter through the front because she needed to prove anything. She entered because every door in that building now belonged to the same truth. No worker was less human in the back hallway. No guest was more valuable under the chandeliers. And no woman would be thrown away simply because power found her inconvenient. The ceremony began beneath the central chandelier. Guests gathered with champagne. Employees stood among them, not hidden behind columns or kept along the edges as decoration. Clara had insisted on that. If the reopening celebrated the hotel, then it would celebrate the people who carried it. She saw Denise from laundry standing near the front desk, arms crossed like she was trying not to look emotional. She saw the night auditor smiling shyly beside the concierge team. She saw Julian near the back, proud but restrained, as always. And then she saw Ethan. He stood near the side of the room, not on the stage, not beside the board, not claiming a place his last name would have once demanded. He wore a dark suit, simple and elegant, but there was nothing armored in him now. When their eyes met, he did not smile as if he had a right to her softness. He simply looked at her with quiet respect, the kind that waited to be invited. Clara felt the old ache move through her, but it did not cut the same way anymore. Some wounds, she had learned, did not vanish. They became places where truth could enter more carefully. When Clara stepped forward to speak, the room quieted. For one heartbeat, she remembered the other silence. The hallway, the bracelet, Vivian's false tears, Ethan's sentence. "People like you don't belong in places like this." That memory rose, expecting to take her breath. But Clara stood beneath the chandelier, looked at the faces before her, and breathed anyway. The past had once made her small in this hotel. Now it had to watch her speak. "Years ago," Clara began, "I believed that hotels were measured by what guests saw first." Her voice was steady, warm, and clear enough to carry to the edges of the lobby. The flowers in the entrance, the shine of the floor, the softness of the towels, the elegance of the rooms. She paused, looking toward the staff standing among the guests. "But I have learned that a hotel is truly measured by what happens where guests do not look, in the laundry room, at the staff entrance, behind the front desk after midnight, in the way leadership treats the people whose names may never appear on a brochure." A quiet stillness settled over the room. Clara continued. Luxury without dignity is only decoration. Service without respect is only obedience. And excellence that depends on invisible suffering is not excellence at all. Ethan lowered his eyes, but he did not look away from the truth. Clara saw that. She saw him receive the words instead of defending himself against them. That mattered, not enough to rewrite the past, enough to prove the future was no longer being built by the same man. This hotel has a history, Clara said. Some of it is beautiful, some of it is painful. Tonight is not about pretending the painful parts did not happen. It is about deciding they will not be repeated. She looked briefly toward Margaret, then Denise, then the young front desk agent who had once told her she was afraid to report abusive guests. From this night forward, the Whitmore Grand will not be a place where only wealth is welcomed. It will be a place where people are seen, guests, employees, strangers, leaders, all of us, because no building is grand if it teaches human beings to feel small. Applause came slowly at first, as if people needed a moment to understand that they had not heard a speech so much as a line being drawn. Then it grew. Staff clapped with tears in their eyes. Guests clapped because they felt the force of sincerity, even if they did not know the full story. Julian clapped with one hand over his heart, though he would deny it later. Margaret cried openly, and Ethan stood still for a second too long before bringing his hands together. His applause was quiet, but his face held something deeper than admiration. It held remorse that had finally learned how to bow without asking to be forgiven for it. After the ceremony, the lobby filled with music and conversation, but Clara slipped away before anyone could surround her with too many congratulations. She walked through the ballroom, now restored with warm flowers on every table and soft lights reflecting against the polished floor. This was the same room where the engagement gala had once celebrated the life that had crushed hers in a hallway nearby. Now it felt different. Not innocent, never innocent, but no longer hostile. The room had been claimed by another story. She found Ethan standing near the far windows, alone. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "I was not following you," he said immediately, with a small seriousness that almost made her smile. "I know," Clara answered. For a moment they stood in the glow of the ballroom lights, both aware of how much silence had once harmed them and how carefully silence now held them. "You spoke beautifully," he said. "I spoke honestly. That is why it was beautiful." The answer was simple enough to be safe, but Clara still felt it touch her. She walked closer, stopping beside him at the window. Below them, guests arrived beneath the awning, employees moved confidently through the lobby, and the front doors opened again and again without fear. "It feels strange," she said. "What does?" "Not hating this place." Ethan looked down, pain passing through his face. "I gave you many reasons to." "Yes," she said. He accepted the answer without flinching. Then she added, "But I gave myself more reasons not to let hatred own it." Ethan turned toward her fully. "I spent years being heir to a name," he said. "I thought that meant I belonged wherever the name was written, but I did not know how to belong to anything properly. Not this hotel, not the people who worked here, not even my own conscience." His voice grew quieter. "When I lost the right to be admired, I think I finally started becoming a man." Clara looked at him for a long time. The old Ethan would have made that sentence sound noble. This Ethan sounded almost embarrassed by how late the truth had arrived. "I read the letter," Clara said. Ethan's face stilled. "All of it?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, bracing himself. "I am sorry you had to read that version of me." "I already lived because of that version of you," she said. The words hurt, but they were not cruel, they were true. "And still," she continued, "there was something in that letter I did not expect." "What?" "That you knew your certainty was not clean." He closed his eyes briefly. "No, it was not." Clara looked toward the ballroom floor. "For a long time I thought forgiveness would mean pretending I was not angry anymore." Ethan listened without moving. "But I think forgiveness is something else. It is refusing to let anger choose my future, even while memory keeps telling the truth." Her voice softened. "I forgive you, Ethan." His breath caught, and the room seemed to still around those 3 words. He did not step toward her. He did not reach for her. He only bowed his head as tears filled his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "No," Clara said gently. "Do not thank me like it is a gift you can keep on a shelf. Live in a way that honors it." "I will," he said. The answer came without hesitation, but not with arrogance. It sounded like a vow he knew would have to be kept in ordinary, unglamorous ways. In laundry rooms, in meetings, in how he spoke when no one powerful listened. Clara saw that understanding in him, and for the first time, the tenderness she had been holding back did not feel like a betrayal of herself. It felt like something that had waited behind the locked door, patient enough not to rush her, strong enough not to disappear. She reached into the small pocket of her jacket and took out the old employee badge. Ethan's eyes lowered to it. Clara held it between them for a moment. I kept this because I thought I needed proof of what they did to me, she said. Now I think I kept it because that girl deserved to come back and see who she became. She placed the badge on the windowsill. Not discarded, not hidden, released. Ethan looked at it, then at her. She would be proud of you, he said. Clara smiled through sudden tears. I think she finally is. The music from the lobby drifted softly into the ballroom. Ethan extended his hand, not confidently, not as a man making an assumption, but as one offering a question. May I have one dance, Miss Bennett? The title, once used by others with professional distance, sounded different from him now. Respectful, careful, almost reverent. Clara looked at his hand, then at the room where his old world had once stood shining over her humiliation. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. One dance, she said. His smile trembled. One honest dance. They moved to the center of the ballroom without music meant only for them, and somehow that made it more beautiful. The melody from the lobby was faint, imperfect, interrupted by conversation and footsteps, but Ethan held her as if the whole world had quieted around the lesson he had almost learned too late. Clara's hand rested on his shoulder. His hand remained steady at her back, never pulling too hard, never assuming more than she gave. They danced slowly beneath the chandeliers, not erasing the past, but giving it no permission to lead. You belong here, Ethan said quietly. Clara looked up at him. There was a time those words from him might have felt like permission. Now they felt like acknowledgement. I know, she said. The answer moved through him like grace. For a moment, all Ethan could do was look at her, the woman he had misjudged, the leader he respected, the heart he had wounded, the person who had become powerful without becoming cruel. I love you, he whispered. Clara's breath trembled, but she did not look away. I know that too, he smiled sadly. That is not an answer. No, she said, and for the first time that night, a true smile touched her mouth. It is not. She stopped dancing, but did not let go of his hand. I love the man you are becoming, she said, and I love myself enough not to rush the rest. Ethan nodded, emotion shining openly in his eyes. That is more than I deserve. Maybe, Clara said softly, but love is not about what people deserve. It is about what they are willing to become responsible for. Ethan lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, slow and reverent. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the tenderness of it move through places that had once known only shame. When she opened them, he was watching her, waiting, always waiting now. That patience, more than any apology, made her heart step closer. She rose slightly, her free hand touching his face with a softness that surprised them both. Ethan breathed in, still asking without words, and this time, Clara answered. Their kiss began gently under the chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand. Not as a victory, not as a forgetting, not as the fairy tale ending of pain neatly erased by romance. It was quieter, deeper, and more honest than that. It was the kiss of a woman who had taken back her name, her place, and her future. It was the kiss of a man who had lost his throne and found his conscience. And it was the first kiss between them that did not ask the past to disappear before love could enter. When they parted, Ethan rested his forehead near hers, careful not to hold her too tightly. I will keep becoming, he whispered. Clara smiled, tears still bright in her eyes. You will have to. I know. She looked toward the windowsill where the old badge lay beneath the soft gold light. Then she looked back at him. And I will keep building. Together they stood in the room that had once belonged to his family's pride and now belonged to something far more difficult to create. Truth. Later, when the guests had gone and the staff were laughing quietly near the front desk, Clara walked toward the main entrance of the Whitmore Grand. Ethan walked beside her, not leading, not following, simply matching her pace. Margaret watched from the lobby with tears in her eyes. Julian stood beside her, pretending to check his phone so no one would see him smile. The doorman opened the golden doors, and cool night air entered the hotel. For a second, Clara remembered rain, a cardboard box, a service exit closing behind her. Then she stepped forward. Outside, the city lights glowed like promises that no longer needed to be proven to anyone. Ethan's hand brushed hers, then waited. Clara looked down, smiled softly, and took it. Behind them, someone from the staff called, "Good night, Miss Bennett." The title crossed the lobby with warmth, respect, and belonging. Clara turned back once toward the hotel, not as the girl begging to be believed, not as the woman seeking revenge, but as the owner who had changed the meaning of the place that once rejected her. Then she walked through the front entrance hand in hand with Ethan, knowing at last that she had never needed permission to belong. She had only needed to come home to herself.